The lunch rush had just begun when the restaurant started to fill with the usual mix of families, office workers, and travelers passing through. The clatter of dishes, the soft music, and the hum of conversations blended together. But somehow, in all the noise, the soft sound of a child sniffling stood out to the server. She had worked in the restaurant long enough to notice when something didn't feel right, and this moment was one of them. She glanced toward a corner table near the window, where a small boy sat all by himself. His little shoulders were moving as he tried to wipe his tears with the sleeve of his shirt. He had a backpack tucked beside him, as if he had been carrying it for hours. The server instinctively slowed down, watching him for a moment to make sure she wasn't mistaken. He looked too quiet, too sad, too lost in his own world. Without wanting to frighten him, she walked over gently. She bent down slightly so she wouldn't be towering over him. A soft smile crossed her face, the kind she often used to comfort nervous children who came in with their families. "Hey," she said softly, keeping her voice calm. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" The boy didn't look up right away. He only shook his head, a tiny, slow shake as if even that took too much effort. She could see how tightly he held the edge of the table, as if holding on to something familiar would keep him steady. She tried again. "Do you want a glass of water? Or something to eat?" This time he lifted his face, and she saw his red eyes and the tear marks on his cheeks. He looked younger than she had thought, maybe 7, maybe 8, no older. His voice came out small and shaky. I'm just waiting." "For who?" she asked softly. "My dad," he whispered. His answer made something tighten inside her chest. She looked around the restaurant again, but no one nearby seemed connected to him. The boy sat alone, his little legs dangling above the floor. She wanted to ask more but didn't want to overwhelm him. "Did he say he's coming soon?" He said he'd be here before school ended," the boy murmured. "But I waited outside a long time. Then I walked here because he always brings me here." The server felt her heart twist. The idea of such a young boy walking alone toward a busy restaurant was enough to make anyone worry. But she kept her expression gentle and calm, not wanting him to feel judged or embarrassed. "You did a good job coming somewhere safe," she said. "Do you want me to call him for you?" He shook his head quickly this time. He's busy. He always says he's busy." The boy rubbed his eyes hard, as if trying to push the tears back. Maybe he forgot. There was something about the way he said it, like he had learned to accept disappointment quietly, that made the server stop herself from speaking too quickly. Instead, she gently pulled a napkin from the holder and placed it in front of him. "Here," she said. "It's okay to be upset." The boy took it without looking up. Her shift was busy, but leaving the child alone didn't feel right. She stood up a little straighter and said, "I'll get you some water. Okay? You don't have to order anything. Just sit tight for a bit." He nodded slightly. She walked to the service counter and filled a glass with cold water. She added a small slice of lemon. Not because he asked for it, but because she thought it might make him feel a little special. Before returning, she grabbed one of the small complimentary desserts the restaurant sometimes offered to kids on their birthdays. It was a tiny chocolate cup with a swirl of cream on top. She brought everything back to the table and set it down gently. "This is for you," she said. "You don't have to finish it. Just have a little if you feel like it." The boy stared at the dessert for a moment, then at her. His lips trembled, but this time he wasn't crying. He was trying not to smile. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Of course." She took a small step back. "If you need anything, I'll be right over there." She pointed to the counter. "You just wave, okay?" He nodded again. As she walked away, she couldn't help glancing back every few seconds. The boy sat with his hands around the cup of water, as if the simple gesture had given him some comfort. She watched him take a tiny spoonful of the dessert. The faintest smile crossed his face. But then, as quickly as it appeared, it faded. He pulled his backpack onto his lap and hugged it close, resting his chin on top of it. The server knew that look well. Children trying to comfort themselves when no one else was around. She tried to continue her work, serving customers, clearing tables and taking orders, but her thoughts kept returning to the child. Every time she glanced over, he looked smaller, more fragile in that big empty booth. A coworker stepped beside her and asked quietly, "Who's the kid? Is he waiting for someone?" "His dad," she whispered. "I think he's been waiting a long time." Her coworker frowned with concern. "Should we call someone? Maybe the police?" "Not yet," she said quickly. "Let's give it a little more time. He said his father hasn't forgotten before. Maybe he really is on his way." But she couldn't ignore the feeling in her stomach. Something about the situation felt off. Not dangerous, but sad in a way she couldn't describe. When her short break arrived, she decided not to spend it in the back room like usual. Instead, she walked to the boys' table and asked, "Do you mind if I sit here for a minute?" He looked surprised but shook his head. She sat quietly at first, not wanting to ask too many questions. She noticed the keychain hanging from his backpack, a tiny, worn astronaut. She pointed to it. "You like space?" she asked. His eyes brightened just a little. "Yeah, my dad bought me this when I was smaller. He said one day we'd go to a space museum together. But he hasn't had time yet." She nodded slowly, understanding more through what he didn't say than what he did. Kids didn't usually speak this calmly about disappointment unless they were used to it. "You know," she said carefully, "you're doing really well waiting like this. A lot of kids would be scared sitting alone." He shrugged lightly. "I'm used to waiting." The words pierced her more than she expected. She didn't want the boy to think being forgotten or left waiting was normal. She reached for a small toy from the box the restaurant kept for younger customers. A tiny plastic dinosaur. She placed it on the table beside him. "This one is for you," she said. "He doesn't talk much either, so you two might get along." The boy giggled softly, surprising even himself. It was such a small sound, but it made the server smile warmly. They talked for a few more minutes, nothing heavy, just little things to help him feel less alone. He told her about school, about how he liked drawing rockets, and about how his dad's job kept him busy. She listened without interrupting, giving him space to express himself. Every time he hesitated, she encouraged him with a gentle nod. After a while, he asked, almost in a whisper, "Do you think he's coming?" She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to scare him either. "I think he's trying his best," she said. "And until he gets here, you're not alone. I'm right here." The boy looked down at his hands, then at her, and finally breathed a soft sigh of relief. As she stood up to return to her shift, she felt something shift inside her. A quiet promise that she wouldn't let the child feel abandoned, not while he was in her care. She walked away, unaware that in just a few minutes, the door would swing open, and everything in the restaurant would change. The afternoon sun shifted through the restaurant windows as the server returned to her routine, but her mind kept drifting back to the small boy sitting alone in the booth. She checked on him from a distance every few minutes, making sure he wasn't getting overwhelmed again. He seemed calmer now, though still hugging his backpack as if he needed it for comfort. She carried a tray of drinks to another table, smiled politely at a group of office workers, and answered a customer's question about the lunch special. She did everything she normally did, but something about today felt different. It wasn't often that a child wandered in alone, tears still drying on his cheeks, waiting for a parent who might not realize how long he had been missing. When the server's next short break arrived, she didn't think twice. Instead of heading to the staff room, she walked over to the boys' table again, gently placing her hands on the back of the seat. "Mind if I sit with you again for a moment?" she asked. He looked up with a shy nod, pushing his backpack aside just enough for her to sit. She settled across from him, trying not to disturb the little toy dinosaur she had given him earlier. It sat next to his water glass like a tiny guardian. "You're feeling a bit better now?" she asked softly. He wiped his nose with the napkin she gave him and nodded again. "A little. That's good," she said. "You were very brave earlier. It's not easy waiting like that." The boy's eyes lowered to his hands. "I didn't want to cry. I know I should be strong." The server felt a pinch in her chest. "Crying doesn't mean you're not strong. It just means you're human. Even grown-ups cry sometimes." He looked up as if unsure whether to believe her. I cried last week because I burned a whole tray of bread, she added with a playful whisper. That made him laugh. A small, breathy laugh, but a laugh all the same. She smiled. See? Everyone gets upset sometimes. The boy took a sip of water and held the glass with both hands. His voice was steadier now. My dad says he works a lot because he wants me to have everything. That sounds like he cares about you, she said. I know, but sometimes... The boy's voice grew quiet. Sometimes I wish he'd just be there. The server didn't interrupt. She let him speak at his own pace. He used to read me stories, the boy continued. But then he got busier and busier. Now he says he'll make it up to me. He says that a lot. There was no anger in his tone. Just a soft sadness, the kind that made people grow up too fast. The server reached for a small paper packet of sugar on the table and turned it over in her hands while she thought. You know, she said gently, sometimes parents get caught up in work. They might not see how much it hurts when they forget things. But that doesn't mean they don't love you. The boy took a moment, then nodded. I know he loves me. I just wish he would show it more. She wished she could give him an answer that fixed everything. But life wasn't that simple. Instead, she chose something honest. Some people think being busy means they're doing the right thing, she said. But sometimes the best thing is just spending time with the people who matter. The boy nodded again, but more slowly this time. To change the mood, she pointed to his backpack. What do you keep in there? It looks important. His face brightened a little. My drawings. Oh, can I see one? She asked with gentle excitement. He hesitated, then unzipped the bag and pulled out a small stack of papers. The top one showed a rocket flying past a big, round planet. The lines were shaky but full of imagination. Wow, the server said. This is amazing. You drew this. He nodded shyly. You're really talented. Do you want to be an astronaut? He shook his head. No, I want to build rockets. A rocket builder, she repeated with admiration. That's even cooler. The boy smiled, and for a moment, she could see how proud he was of himself. An expression he probably didn't get to show often. Do you show these to your dad? She asked. Sometimes, he said. He says they're great, but he's always rushing. He never looks for very long. The server could hear the disappointment in his tone, but she didn't want to make him feel worse. Well, I think they're wonderful, she said. You should keep drawing. You're really good. He tucked the papers back into his bag carefully, as if they were something precious. Then he asked quietly, Do you have a dream? She blinked, surprised. A dream? He nodded. Well, she said after a moment, I always wanted to go to cooking school. I love cooking, but school is expensive, so for now I work here and practice whenever I can. Do you cook good food? He asked. She laughed lightly. I try. Some days better than others. The boy smiled again, a tiny but warm expression that softened his whole face. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he asked, Do you think my dad would be mad if he knew I cried? No, she said firmly. I think he'd feel sad that you were scared. Parents don't want their kids to feel alone. The boy looked thoughtful, as if he were trying to understand a world bigger than he could grasp. Can I stay here until he comes? He whispered. Of course, the server said. You're safe here, and I won't let anyone bother you. He relaxed visibly, his small hands unclenching from his backpack straps. As minutes passed, the boy began talking more freely. He told her about his favorite subject at school, a game he liked to play with his classmates, and his dream of building a rocket that could fly higher than anything ever built before. The server listened with genuine interest. She didn't rush him, didn't interrupt, didn't look bored or distracted. She simply let him speak. It was clear that he wasn't used to adults giving him that kind of attention. At one point, he looked at her with a puzzled expression. Why are you being so nice to me? He asked. She placed her hands lightly on the table. Because everyone deserves kindness, she said simply. And because you looked like you needed someone today. The boy stared at her for a moment, almost as if he didn't know how to respond. No one ever sits with me like this, he said quietly. Her heart tightened, but she kept her tone light. "Well, you've got me today," she said with a smile. "And I'm not going anywhere." A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't wide or bright, but it carried something deeper, trust. The server glanced at the door again, hoping the boy's father would appear soon. But there was still no sign of anyone rushing in or looking for a missing child. She didn't want him to notice her worry, so she picked up the tiny dinosaur and held it up. "You know," she whispered, "this little guy told me he used to guard treasure." The boy giggled. "He didn't say that." "He did," she insisted playfully. "He said he's a very serious dinosaur. No funny business." The boy laughed again, louder this time. The sound made nearby customers glance over with friendly smiles. The server smiled too, relieved to see him acting like a child again instead of someone carrying too much in his heart. But then, something else crossed his face. A look of concern. "What if he's not coming?" he whispered suddenly. The server leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Hey," she said gently, "let's not think that way yet. Sometimes grown-ups get stuck in traffic or in meetings. But I promise you this, you won't be alone. Not here." He nodded, holding on to her words. To distract him, she brought over some crayons and a small sheet of paper. "Here," she said. "Want to draw something while you wait?" He took the crayons slowly, as if unsure whether he should. Then he picked a blue one and began to draw a small rocket lifting off the ground. She watched quietly, letting him focus on something positive. As he sketched, his shoulders dropped, his breathing steadied, and the anxious look faded from his eyes. But just as she began to relax too, everything changed. The door swung open with a sudden force. A gust of air rushed in, along with a tall, frantic man scanning the room like he had lost something precious. The boy froze mid-stroke. The server turned toward the entrance, her heart pounding. She didn't know who the man was. She didn't know what was about to happen. But she could feel it. The air had shifted, and the quiet comfort she had built around the child was about to collide with something much bigger. The moment the restaurant door opened with a loud push, the calm atmosphere shifted. Conversations softened, forks paused mid-air, and a few heads turned. The server felt the change before she even saw who had come in. It was the kind of heavy tension that entered a room before a person even said a word. A tall man stepped inside, breathing hard as if he had run a long distance. His clothes were elegant, the kind that only wealthy people usually wore, but they were slightly wrinkled as if he had rushed to put them on. His hair was messy, and his eyes scanned the restaurant with sharp worry. The little boy beside her stiffened instantly. His hand froze over the drawing he was making. The blue crayon slipped from his fingers and rolled across the table. "That's my dad," he whispered, barely louder than a breath. The server glanced at the boy, then back at the man. His worry was clear. His eyes moved quickly from table to table, searching, desperate, afraid. It was the look of a parent who had realized something too late. Before the server could encourage the boy to wave or call out, the man's eyes landed on the booth. Relief washed over his face so visibly that it almost looked painful. Without thinking, he rushed forward. The boy stood up from the seat, his backpack held tightly against his chest. "Dad!" he cried, but the sound wasn't loud. It was full of emotion, like a child who had been holding himself together for too long. The man reached the table in just a few long steps. He knelt down and pulled his son into his arms so quickly that the boy gasped from the sudden grip. "Oh, thank goodness," the man murmured in a shaky voice. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He held his son as if afraid he would disappear again. The boy's small hands clung to his father's coat, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to slow. The server took a small step back. She didn't want to interrupt the reunion, but she stayed close in case the boy needed her. The father didn't seem to notice her right away. He was too focused on his son. "I looked everywhere," the father said, pulling back slightly to check the boy's face. "I went to the school, the street, the park. I didn't know where you went. You scared me." The boy's voice trembled. "I waited for you. You didn't come." The father swallowed hard, his eyes full of guilt. I know, and I'm sorry. I should have been there. I should never have let this happen. The server felt her heart soften toward the man. She didn't know him, but she could see that he wasn't careless on purpose. He was someone buried in too much work and too many responsibilities. Someone who probably loved his child more than anything but didn't always show it in time. Finally, the father lifted his head and noticed the server standing nearby. He blinked as if suddenly realizing she had been there the whole time. "Were you the one watching him?" the father asked, his voice a mix of relief and embarrassment. The server nodded gently. "He was upset when he came in. I didn't want him to be alone." The father stood up slowly, still keeping one hand on his son's shoulder as if afraid to lose contact. When he faced the server fully, she realized something surprising. She recognized him not as a regular customer but from the news. Her breath caught quietly. He was someone important, the kind of person people talked about, a billionaire businessman, someone who owned companies, hired thousands of workers, and made decisions that could change the direction of entire industries. But in that moment, he didn't look powerful at all. He looked like a father trying not to fall apart. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and full of sincerity. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't helped him." The server shook her head. "He just needed someone to be with him. That's all." The father let out a shaky breath. "Still, thank you." The boy tugged on his father's sleeve. "She sat with me. She talked to me. She made me feel better." The father turned to his son and gently brushed a tear off his cheek. "She was very kind then. We were lucky she was here." The server felt warmth spread through her chest, but she also felt a little awkward. She wasn't used to being thanked so deeply, especially not by someone with such influence. The father straightened his jacket and looked down at his son again. "Are you hungry? Did you eat anything?" The boy glanced at the small leftover dessert on the table. "She gave me this," he said quietly. "It was good." The moment the restaurant door opened with a loud push, the calm atmosphere shifted. Conversations softened, forks paused mid-air, and a few heads turned. The server felt the change before she even saw who had come in. It was the kind of heavy tension that entered a room before a person even said a word. A tall man stepped inside, breathing hard as if he had run a long distance. His clothes were elegant, the kind that only wealthy people usually wore, but they were slightly wrinkled as if he had rushed to put them on. His hair was messy, and his eyes scanned the restaurant with sharp worry. The little boy beside her stiffened instantly. His hand froze over the drawing he was making. The blue crayon slipped from his fingers and rolled across the table. "That's my dad," he whispered, barely louder than a breath. The server glanced at the boy, then back at the man. His worry was clear. His eyes moved quickly from table to table, searching, desperate, afraid. It was the look of a parent who had realized something too late. Before the server could encourage the boy to wave or call out, the man's eyes landed on the booth. Relief washed over his face so visibly that it almost looked painful. Without thinking, he rushed forward. The boy stood up from the seat, his backpack held tightly against his chest. "Dad!" he cried, but the sound wasn't loud. It was full of emotion, like a child who had been holding himself together for too long. The man reached the table in just a few long steps. He knelt down and pulled his son into his arms so quickly that the boy gasped from the sudden grip. "Oh, thank goodness," the man murmured in a shaky voice. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He held his son as if afraid he would disappear again. The boy's small hands clung to his father's coat, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to slow. The server took a small step back. She didn't want to interrupt the reunion, but she stayed close in case the boy needed her. The father didn't seem to notice her right away. He was too focused on his son. "I looked everywhere," the father said, pulling back slightly to check the boy's face. "I went to the school, the street, the park. I didn't know where you went. You scared me." The boy's voice trembled. "I waited for you. You didn't come." The father swallowed hard, his eyes full of guilt. I know, and I'm sorry. I should have been there. I should never have let this happen." The The server felt her heart soften toward the man. She didn't know him, but she could see that he wasn't careless on purpose. He was someone buried in too much work and too many responsibilities. Someone who probably loved his child more than anything but didn't always show it in time. Finally, the father lifted his head and noticed the server standing nearby. He blinked as if suddenly realizing she had been there the whole time. "Were you the one watching him?" the father asked, his voice a mix of relief and embarrassment. The server nodded gently. "He was upset when he came in. I didn't want him to be alone." The father stood up slowly, still keeping one hand on his son's shoulder as if afraid to lose contact. When he faced the server fully, she realized something surprising. She recognized him not as a regular customer but from the news. Her breath caught quietly. He was someone important, the kind of person people talked about, a billionaire businessman, someone who owned companies, hired thousands of workers, and made decisions that could change the direction of entire industries. But in that moment he didn't look powerful at all. He looked like a father trying not to fall apart. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and full of sincerity. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't helped him." The server shook her head. "He just needed someone to be with him. That's all." The father let out a shaky breath. "Still, thank you." The boy tugged on his father's sleeve. "She sat with me. She talked to me. She made me feel better." The father turned to his son and gently brushed a tear off his cheek. "She was very kind then. We were lucky she was here." The server felt warmth spread through her chest, but she also felt a little awkward. She wasn't used to being thanked so deeply, especially not by someone with such influence. The father straightened his jacket and looked down at his son again. "Are you hungry? Did you eat anything?" The boy glanced at the small leftover dessert on the table. "She gave me this," he said quietly. "It was good." The father looked back at the server. "You gave him food?" "It was just a small treat," she said. "I didn't want him to feel worse." The father nodded slowly. "That means more than you know." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I had a meeting that went longer than I planned. I kept telling myself I'd leave in just a minute, but then another call came in, and then another. By the time I checked the time, he was already waiting." The boy looked down, but the father placed a gentle hand on his head. "That was my fault," he said. "Not yours. You didn't do anything wrong." The boy nodded, but there was still sadness in his eyes. The server watched quietly, giving them space. She could tell the father was trying, truly trying, even if he didn't always get things right. After a moment, the father turned back to her. "Please," he said, "can I at least pay for something? A drink? A meal? Anything you brought him?" She shook her head. "There's nothing to pay for. I didn't ring anything in. It was just a little kindness." The father looked genuinely startled. He was probably used to people doing things for him with conditions attached. But the server's kindness had come with nothing expected in return. "Well," he said softly, "I'm very grateful." The boy clutched his backpack and looked up at his father again. "Can we go home now?" "Yes," the father said, brushing his thumb over the boy's cheek. "We're going home. I won't let anything like this happen again." The boy nodded but looked toward the server once more. "Will you be here next time?" he asked. The server smiled warmly. "I'm always around here," she said. "If you ever need someone, you know where to find me." The boy gave a small smile, filled with a mixture of relief and affection. Before they left, the father placed his hands on his son's shoulders and guided him toward the door. But just as the server thought the moment was over, the father paused and turned back. His expression had changed. It wasn't just relief anymore. It was something else, something thoughtful. "Can I ask your name?" he said. She gave it, feeling a little shy. The father repeated it quietly, as if memorizing it. Then he said, "I owe you more than a simple thank you. You helped my son when I wasn't there. And that means everything to me." She nodded politely, unsure what else to say. But deep inside, she felt something shift in the room, as if this small act of kindness had connected their lives in a way none of them expected. The father opened the door and gently guided his son outside. Before stepping out, the boy turned back and waved. The server waved too, her smile gentle. She watched them walk toward a black car parked outside, a car she hadn't noticed earlier. Someone stepped out to open the door for them. That's when she realized just how important the father really was. Still, she didn't see him as a powerful man. She saw him as a father who almost lost sight of what mattered, and who had been brought back by his child's tears and a stranger's kindness. As the doors closed and the car pulled away, the server took a deep breath. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know how much this moment would change her life. All she knew was that something big had just happened, even if she couldn't fully understand it yet. And somewhere in that car, a father was realizing the same thing, that sometimes it takes a stranger's kindness to remind you of the most important person in your world. The restaurant fell into a strange quiet after the tall man walked inside. Even though no one knew who he was, people could sense the weight he carried. His sharp suit, the calm but controlled way he moved, and the heavy silence around him made it clear he wasn't an ordinary customer. The server, who had been sitting beside the child only moments ago, slowly stood up and took one careful step back. She didn't want the child to feel suddenly exposed or scared again, but she also understood that this moment belonged to the two of them. The child's eyes lit up the instant he saw the man. All the worry and sadness from before seemed to melt away in a heartbeat. He rushed forward and wrapped his small arms around the man's leg with a kind of relief that was almost painful to watch. The man froze for a second, like he wasn't used to such a simple but deep gesture. But then he slowly placed a hand on the boy's back. It was gentle, slow, and full of emotion he wasn't sure how to show. "I'm sorry," the child whispered, almost too quietly to hear. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." The man lowered himself to one knee, meeting the child at eye level. Now that he was closer, the server could see things she hadn't noticed from afar. Heavy lines around his eyes, the kind that only appear from long nights of worry, and a tiredness hidden behind the firmness of his expression. This wasn't just the face of a powerful man. It was the face of a father who had been fighting battles no one else could see. "You didn't cause any trouble," he said softly. "I should have been here sooner." Hearing that made something tighten in the server's chest. She looked away for a second, giving them space, but she stayed close enough in case the child needed her again. The father pulled the boy into a full embrace, holding him like he was afraid to ever let go again. For a moment, the world around them disappeared. The noise from the kitchen, the quiet conversations from the tables, the clinking of dishes, it all faded. After a long moment, the man stood up with the child's hand still held tightly in his own. Then he turned toward the server. His expression was unreadable, and she wasn't sure if he was going to thank her, question her, or blame her for something. She quietly braced herself. But before the man could speak, the child tugged his hand. "She helped me," the child said quickly. "She sat with me. She didn't leave." The man's eyes softened. Their cold, distant look faded, replaced by something more human, something honest. He nodded slowly, as if those words meant more to him than anyone could understand. "Is that true?" he asked. The server gave a small smile, trying to look calm even though her heart had been racing since the moment he stepped in. "He looked upset," she replied. "I just wanted to make sure he wasn't alone." There was a brief silence, but not the uncomfortable kind. Just a quiet moment where the man seemed to process everything he had walked into. He glanced at the seats where the server and the child had sat together minutes earlier. He imagined them there, her comforting him, the boy trusting her, and a strange mixture of gratitude and guilt crossed his face. "I appreciate that," he said finally. "More than you know." The child squeezed his hand again. "She talked to me, and she made me feel better," he added in a small voice. The server wasn't used to this kind of attention. She looked down shyly and brushed a hand against her apron. "He's a good kid," she said. "Just needed someone to talk to. That's all." The man let out a slow breath, like he had been holding it for too long. He seemed to relax just a little, the tension in his shoulders easing. "I've been busy," he admitted. "Too busy." I didn't realize how much it was affecting him. The server listened quietly. She didn't want to intrude on a father's personal thoughts, but she also didn't want him to feel judged. She could sense he wasn't the type of person who opened up easily, especially in public. "You're here now," she said softly. "That's what matters to him." The child nodded quickly, as if agreeing was the easiest decision in the world. The father looked down at him again, and a faint smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. Small but real. A moment passed before the father looked back at her. "Did he say anything?" he asked gently. "Anything you think I should know?" The server hesitated, not wanting to betray the child's trust. She kneeled beside him and asked, "Do you want me to tell him?" The child nodded after a moment, holding onto his father's hand more tightly, like he felt safer now. "He was just upset that you were late," she said carefully. "He missed you, and he felt scared waiting alone." The father closed his eyes briefly, the guilt washing over him again. But when he opened them, there was a different understanding there, a promise to try harder. "Thank you for being honest," he said quietly. The server nodded. "He's really brave," she added. "He handled it better than most kids his age." The child looked down shyly, then leaned his head against his father's side. The man rested a hand on the child's shoulder, and the two of them stood together in a comfortable silence. Something about this moment felt fragile yet hopeful at the same time. "Can I order something for him?" the man asked suddenly. "I think we could both use a calm meal." "Of course," the server replied with a warm smile. "I'll get you both a quiet table." She led them to a spot near the window, where soft light fell gently across the table. The father helped the child into the seat, his movements gentler than before, as though understanding how much the child needed steady reassurance. She handed them menus, but the man didn't open his. Instead, he focused on the child, making sure he was comfortable. As she stepped back, she could hear their soft voices, small pieces of conversation, gentle questions, quiet reassurances. It was the kind of interaction that showed this wasn't a cold man with a strict exterior. He was simply someone who had been too focused on carrying the world on his shoulders and forgot he didn't have to do it alone. When the server returned with water, the man looked up with a softer expression than before. "Thank you," he said again, but this time his voice carried more meaning. It wasn't just polite, it was sincere. She nodded with a smile. "If you need anything, I'm right here." As she walked away, the server felt a kind of quiet satisfaction. She hadn't done anything extraordinary. She had just been present. But sometimes, presence was the most meaningful thing someone could offer. Little did she know, this small act of kindness would change her life in ways she never imagined. And as the father sat with his son, taking the time he had once overlooked, he realized the same thing. One simple moment of compassion could open a door neither of them saw coming. The meal the father and child shared slowly brought a soft warmth back into the restaurant. The child, now calm again, ate with small bites while glancing up every now and then at the man beside him, making sure he was still there. The father kept answering every little question, even the ones that didn't need answers, because he seemed to understand that the child was really asking for reassurance, not information. The server watched from a distance as she cleaned nearby tables, wanting to give them privacy, but also wanting to be available if they needed anything. She noticed how the man leaned in whenever the child spoke, how he paused between bites to listen more carefully, and how his entire posture looked different from when he had entered the restaurant earlier. There was less tension in his shoulders now, less pressure behind his expression. He looked like a father trying his best, even if he had spent a long time away from moments like this. When the meal was nearly finished, the man lifted his head and looked around for the server. She noticed the small wave of his hand and walked over with a polite smile. The child smiled, too. A soft, grateful smile that she wasn't expecting but deeply appreciated. It reminded her why she cared so much about her job. Small acts truly mattered. "Everything all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Better than all right," he said quietly. "Thank you for checking on him before I arrived. I don't think I can express how important that was." She shook her head gently. "It's really okay. Anyone would have done it. His eyebrows rose, and he gave a small, thoughtful smile. Not everyone would have done it, he said. Many people see something but look away. You didn't. The child leaned forward slightly and whispered to his father, though not quietly enough to hide from her. She sat with me the whole time. She didn't even go when people called her. The server blushed a little at that, waving her hand lightly. It wasn't a big deal, she insisted. I just didn't want him to feel alone. The father studied her for a moment. There was something very deliberate about the way he looked at people, as if he didn't just hear their words but also listened to everything they didn't say. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated, then said it softly. He repeated it under his breath, almost like he was trying to memorize it. And how long have you worked here? He continued. A while, she replied. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. He nodded slowly. Do you enjoy it? She paused, thinking honestly about the question. I like meeting people, she said. I like helping them. It's not always easy, of course, but I try to make every guest's day just a little better. The child nodded, as if agreeing she had done just that. The father placed a hand on the child's shoulder and looked back at her. You seem like someone who takes care of people, he said. Even when you don't have to. She didn't know how to respond to that. Compliments were nice, but this one felt different. Felt like he saw something in her that she didn't usually talk about. She simply gave a small smile and looked down at her apron. Can I get you both anything else? She asked gently. The child shook his head. I'm full, he said, rubbing his stomach. The father chuckled softly and looked up at her again. Just the bill, he said. She nodded, stepping away to prepare it. When she returned, she placed it on the table. But the man didn't open it right away. Instead, he pulled out his wallet and took a long breath. You didn't have to help him, he said again, softer this time. But you did. And because of you, he felt safe. She stayed quiet, not wanting to make the moment heavier. He's a kid, she said. Kids shouldn't feel scared when an adult can step in. He nodded again, like her words meant something important. He opened the bill folder, slipped in his payment, and closed it. But instead of handing it back immediately, he looked up with a thoughtful expression. Can we talk for a moment? He said. Her heart skipped. Of course, she replied, unsure what he wanted. He waited until the child was distracted with the straw in his drink before speaking again. I realize this may sound strange, he started, lowering his voice. But I'm not just thanking you as a father. I'm thanking you as someone who understands how rare genuine kindness is. She stayed silent, listening. His tone wasn't heavy or dramatic. It was honest. I run a company, he continued. A very large one. My days are full of meetings, numbers, strategies. I'm surrounded by people who want something. People who pretend to care so they can move closer to my table. She didn't interrupt. It felt like he was telling her something he didn't tell many. Today, he said slowly, someone cared for my child for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. That's rare. She felt her chest warm at his words. She wasn't used to being seen like this. I would like to offer you something, he said. She blinked, unsure. Offer? He nodded. Yes, and you're free to say no. I won't take offense. Her hands tightened around the edge of her apron. What kind of offer? One that could change your life, he said calmly. And one you deserve. The child looked up, curious. Is it a good surprise? The father smiled gently and ruffled his hair. Yes, he said. A very good one. Then he looked at her again. I'd like you to come work for me. She froze. Work? For you? He nodded. Yes, you have a natural gift. A human touch. Someone like you could help in ways that matter far beyond serving tables. Her mind raced. She hadn't expected anything like this. Not even close. I don't have a degree, she whispered. I don't have fancy experience. You have something more important, he said. You know how to connect with people. You know how to show kindness without being asked. That's not something I can teach. She didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened. The child smiled brightly. Dad says that's special, he added. She looked between them, the supportive eyes of the child and the calm, steady confidence of the man. I don't know, she said honestly. This is a lot. He nodded respectfully. Take your time. Think about it carefully. Here. He reached into his pocket and handed her a simple card. Nothing fancy, just his name and a contact number. When you're ready, he added, call me, even if the answer is no. She nodded slowly, gripping the card as if it were delicate. The father stood, guiding the child up as well. Thank you again, he said. The child rushed forward and gave her a quick hug around the waist. Thank you for not letting me cry alone, he said softly. Her eyes stung, but she held her breath to keep her emotions steady. Any time, she whispered. The father gave her one last nod of gratitude, then took the child's hand and walked toward the door. As they stepped outside, the child waved happily. She waved back. When the door closed, the restaurant felt strangely quiet again. She looked down at the card in her hand, then at the empty seat where the child had sat. Her heart felt full in a way she hadn't expected. She didn't know what choice she would make yet, but she knew one thing for certain: this day had changed her, and the next chapter of her life, whatever it would be, had just begun.